Hello, and welcome to the Fantasy Rewind Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dylan Stoll, and I'm joined as always by my friend, Michael Whifford.
My eye.
So today, we're going to be talking about House of the Dragon, Episode 7, titled
Driftmark.
So before we get into our breakdown of this episode here, we're going to give out the usual reminders. If you want to follow along with the show, you can do so through email, which is fantasyrewindpod@gmail.com. You could get at us on Instagram, which is @fantasyrewindpod. Or Twitter is also a good option, which is @fantasyrewind. All right, so without any farther delay, let's jump right into the rewind.
Fantasy Rewind. All right. So, episode 6, 7?
7, yeah.
Episode 7. Oh my
Driftmark.
gosh. So many episodes. And it was also, yeah. we're getting close to the end of these series. Kind of sad, but lots happening. And when we think about this episode in particular for House of the Dragon, I feel like it's a really good episode to sort of, it's converged everything, right? All these little things that's happened, it's really kind of come to a head, but it's not the big beast. I think we're just waiting for one more shoe to drop, and that shoe is the king. What were your overall though? I really liked this episode. And what were your thoughts, Dylan?
So this episode was actually my favorite episode of the season so far.
Yeah, I probably agree with that.
So I really like this episode because of what you just said, where it's all these storylines, all these threads kind of coming together and everything. Mm-hmm. I'll bring up some other stuff as we get into some of the more specifics here, but just like in particular, what is going to be going on from this point forward. This is, even though they just like relaunched like with the new actors and actresses, this is like a whole new springboard for them to launch the rest of this season off of, and what will be taking place in seasons to come will be based in the foundation laid in this episode. So I'm really excited to see how that progresses, and I'm also really glad to talk about this episode.
Yeah, I was interested to hear your like kind of connections from the book to this episode. Like, did everything pretty much follow so far as it has in the book?
Well, there's one major difference, and that is that Sir Laenor actually dies in the books. He doesn't get his fairy tale happily ever after run away with his lover
I'm kind of
that he
glad
gets
they gave it to
in
him,
in this. I know he's gotten the short stick all season long, so
Yeah.
he kind of he earned it. Let's just say that.
I agree, and I thought it was just like a nice little twist because you're like, oh, he's definitely dead. So this, before we get in talking about the different pieces here, I mean, you talking about Sir Laenor dying, that makes me. I originally had thought like the three-headed dragon was going to be Daemon, Rhaenyra, and Aegon, and the brood there basically. Now I'm wondering if the three-headed dragon, because you've talked about that, so I'm assuming there is going to be three factions here. If it's going to be Corlys's wife, that Targaryen, and like Daemon and Rhaenyra, and then the brood, or if it's just going to be the two sides where it's the brood, and I keep saying the brood, but it's like all the kids, the king's kids, and his wife Alicent, like heading that. The Greens, if you will, because they did mention that in this episode,
Yeah, they
too.
did. They did. They name-dropped the Greens and the Blacks in this episode, or at least the Greens. They
didn't say
mentioned.
anything about the Blacks that I saw,
Yeah.
but they did say the Greens, and I thought that was interesting because I was like, I had like no. If you hadn't said anything about it, I would have no idea what she means. I was just wondering though. Well, I guess you're not going to really tell me, but I'm sort of thinking now that this three-headed dragon could be very different, or it's just going to be two sides because I don't really see a third side emerging out of this yet.
So I'll tell you this much. We had our three heads of the dragon, which were Viserys and his children, Rhaenyra and her children, and Daemon and his children. Those were the three heads of the dragon, basically. Okay. And now, this episode, we saw the merger of two of those coming together here. So there's two major factions mostly going forward here. I don't think that's too spoilery to say, but
that's fine.
There's lots of good stuff to come with the results of this.
Yeah, I definitely think that with, like, when we think of Corlys's family there and how they pretty much got destroyed.
Yes.
between two of the heads of the dragon. I think it's interesting that they're pretty much just done almost.
So let's pause right here actually and talk about them, because I think this is a good starting point to talk about this episode.
Yeah.
The fate of the Valerians, basically.
Yeah.
So you had Lena Valerian, who was married to Daemon, who at the end of last episode scorched herself with her dragon, like dying a dragon rider's death. And so this episode opens up with her funeral, everybody coming together for her funeral. Over the course of this, many things happen, but I'm going to jump ahead to what's going on with the Valerians here, because they just lost one of their two children, and that was Princess Rhaenys and Corlys Valerian. They lost their daughter, Laena. Now, partway through the episode, towards like maybe 3/4 way through the episode or more, you see a scorched body that is assumed to be Laenor Valerian in the fireplace as well there. And this happens at the funeral still. Like, it's still like the morning weekend where everyone's still together, everyone's still paying their respects to the loss that the Valerians have suffered from Laena dying. And they just get loss piled on top of loss, which is their son dying. But when we know he rides off into the sunset with Sir Carl, but to his parents' eyes, they just lost all of their children.
Yeah.
And so what this really does is this gives some background to the speech that Princess Rhaenys gives to Corlys about how his pride has led to the ruin of their family, how forget those kids that Rhaenyra has, I want Driftmark to pass through Laena's line because she's the older of the siblings, first of all, and she knows that those daughters are the daughters of Laena are her blood. And it's the open secret that the sons of Rhaenyra are not Valerians. They are Strongs, or bastards, because her and Harwin weren't actually married. So having Princess Rhaenys wanting her line to go through Laena and the inheritance of Driftmark going through Laena's line, it really is just showing like the last gasps of the dying Valerian house, which is significant considering they are one of the most powerful houses in Westeros with old Valerian blood, and it's all coming to a head for them where they are just fading.
Yeah, that's a really good... I like that analogy there, last gasps. Because they very much are. So I guess, too, we can think about them sort of joining at least Daemon and Rhaenyra's side because they of the grandchildren.
Well, we do know that they have the last two children of Valyrian blood are Daemon's kids, his daughters. Yeah. So I think it would make sense for them to kind of go where his daughters go. Whether that remains, though, as like a neutral third party trying to like preserve what the little life they have left, or whether it means joining in with Daemon and his girls in whatever venture they take on next. We'll see.
It'll be interesting. And is the mother there? Is she a dragon rider?
She's a Targaryen. She was a dragon rider. I'm not sure at this point if she still is or not.
Yeah. Well, speaking of dragon riders, that sort of leads us into, I think, probably the biggest conflict outside of the whole naming of Rhaenyra's kids as illegitimate.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it all just intermeets.
It all blends together.
So let's just start. So obviously, we have this is a funeral, and at this procession or at this service, we get kind of an intermingling of all the parties from the previous episodes. So, like I said, we have Daemon and his kids, now a widower. We have Rhaenyra, and she's also mourning at this point. She can't openly mourn, but she's mourning because Harwin Strong is dead. And
her kids are right there with her. They're like, I'm mourning the loss of my father, even though I can't say it.
Yeah, because they know now, which is a little different than last episode. They weren't quite sure.
Right.
Or at least the older one wasn't quite sure. And then we have the king and his brood. Aegon. I don't know this. I keep forgetting the second kid's name. He's
Aemon.
Aemon. Yeah, we have Aegon and Aemon and Alicent. And, we have a new Hand of the King. Otto's back.
Also, don't forget their daughter as well, Helena.
Oh, yeah. So is Aegon supposed to marry the daughter? Mm-hmm. His sister?
Yes.
That's so weird.
So let's pause there for a second, because if you remember back in episode 6 here, Rhaenyra proposed the idea of her firstborn son marrying Helena Targaryen to try and like blend their houses together more and like reunite them and all of that. And it was really, Alicent saw straight through it. It was really a defensive mechanism to try and say, oh, we're gonna, pretend this is all okay. Let's just all, marry our kids together again. And Alicent denied that, and her response to that denial basically was, nah, she's gonna marry her brother. So, like, keeping that bloodline very close.
Pure. Mm-hmm. I wonder if Rhaenyra and Daemon will have any kids. That'll be really interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to find out.
Anyway, so we have again the funeral. They're all getting together, and this is where a lot of intrigue happens, right? You have Daemon at one point calling Otto a leech.
Yeah, I loved that. Loved it.
I did too, and because Otto before he had left King's Landing, you were like, okay, like his judgment's a little off, but he's always kind of been sort of a voice of reason, right? No, he's now like completely and openly just like, we're going after everyone, so you got to be prepared. And just very much like I was like, you are a leech.
Well, I feel like that tonal shift for Otto also plays into how Alicent has been acting. Like, Alicent has been openly hostile towards Rhaenyra, towards Rhaenyra's children, and I feel like Otto's like, okay, the veil is gone. No more disguising, no more politicking. We are going for war.
Yeah, which is so interesting because, before it was not like that at all. It was very much like doing duty and everything else. So there was obviously a lot of conflict in this episode, a lot of passive-aggressive conflict. I really loved Daemon in this episode because he just, like, laughed through all these different parts, like, oh, this is just stupid. Like, when they were talking about Valyrian blood being pure and stuff, and he just, like, laughed because he knows about Rhaenyra's kids. And then, when everyone's sort of getting into a little bit of a squabble when they're all together, he's just sort of just, like, watching it with a bemused smile.
And it's so funny because Daemon is like this agent of chaos, and he doesn't even have to do anything to trigger the chaos. He's like, this is all happening around me, like, automatically. Like, the chaos is real.
Very much so. I mean, there's just so much to kind of go through. There's just, like, so many, like, little nuances throughout this episode where you have just this tension slowly building until the very end. And, I mean, I don't know what exactly to talk about in between outside of like some of the major things that happened were Daemon and Rhaenyra finally
get together.
Yeah, they got together. They both mourning and they used each other for comfort. After that, Laenor, there is something that happens before that, but we have Aemon. Okay, Aemon's like, he's obsessed with dragons. He wants a dragon really bad. He does not have his own dragon. And so he goes and he finds
Laena's old dragon, and emphasis on the old, because this thing is decrepit.
Yeah, he is really old, but obviously still commands a lot of respect.
He's the biggest living dragon.
Correct. And so, and his name is Vhagar, right?
Vhagar, yeah.
Vhagar. Thinking of a League of Legends character, I think. So he basically takes this dragon, and he almost dies in the process. The girls wake up. Daemon's kids and
Rhaenyra's kids. And, Daemon and Laena's kids.
Yes, Daemon and Laemon's kids. And they're like, somebody stole Mama's dragon, like our mom's dragon. And they're like, who did it? And then, they all get together and go downstairs, which so weird that they have no guards or anything watching them and they just let them go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so silly. But they basically, Aemon lands the dragons, like, all proud and stuff. And
he comes off swaggering. Like, he's like, oh, yeah, I'm a changed boy now. Where's that pig now? I'm going to feed it to my dragon.
And, the girls are obviously very upset because they're like, that's our mom's dragon. She's like, no, she's dead. I took him. You should have... And they were like, I was going to have him. Well, you should have claimed him. And... this was a really weird interaction for me. I think this was one of the parts of the episode where it just sort of like something didn't. This scene didn't click. Like to the point where they're like, okay, everyone's trying to like punch him, but then he's picking up a stone like he's going to brain one of Rhaenyra's kids.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, what? Wait, hold up a second. And, like, he's choking the kid out, and it's like, okay, like, there's obviously something wrong with that child.
Well, you have to think about this, too. His mom, Alicent, has been doing nothing but poisoning her children against Rhaenyra's children, saying that you need to view them as your enemy, because if Rhaenyra becomes queen, she's going to kill you. Her kids are going to kill you. They're bastards. They're illegitimate. You're the true Targaryens. We need to stomp this mud out. And so that's kind of how I view it, is like she's poisoned her kids so much against Rhaenyra's children that they don't see any consequence. And if they kill them, it's like, oh, you're just a bastard. You're just a commoner. It doesn't matter anyway. You're going to die. Here's what this rock is going to meet your head. And I was a little afraid that he was going to kill one of them.
I thought he was too. I was actually pretty sure he was. And then, the other son there goes up and slices his eye out.
Oh, I know. Basically. I love that scene. It was so gruesome.
I was like, yeah. And then Alicent's all upset about it. Like, they don't even acknowledge the fact that he took... Like, they really don't even bring up the fact that he took the dragon. No one's upset about that. No one even brings up the fact that, like how that had to, like, sort of make people feel like Corlys... Yeah, Corlys never said anything. Like, the other Targaryens didn't even, like, comment on it. Like, nothing.
So at this point as well, you can kind of see this in the last episode too, but Alicent has seized a lot of Viserys' power. And so like it is her kind of running things. And so that's why I view it as no one else like stepped in there, because it was clearly a battle of will and a battle of power between Rhaenyra and Alicent going at it there. And they didn't want to get in the middle of that because of the repercussions that could happen. But I want to point this out as well, and I thought this was a really good little Easter egg. I told Mike before we started recording here today that my wife Amy's been away, so I was rewatching some of the episodes of the shows that she missed, and I watched episode 6 again last night. In episode 6, you hear Helaena Targaryen, while she's talking with her mom, playing with the centipedes and everything, say something along the lines of, oh, there's so many legs, blah, 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 and just, like, going into details about the centipedes, and you're like, oh, whatever, this is just, like, this creepy little girl, like, something's wrong with her for sure. And then when Aemon's brought in and says, like, he was going to try to get a dragon, Helaena says he'll have to close one eye to get a dragon or something. Oh. And so, yeah, it's kind of like a foreshadow of what happens here. Because Aemon lost an eye, but he gained a dragon. And he even says he views that as a fair exchange in the episode.
Well, and Otto says at the end that it was more than a fair exchange.
Yeah.
Because now they have additional firepower.
And the biggest dragon in the world.
Yeah. Which, to be honest with you, I don't know how important being the biggest dragon in the world is when you're also the oldest dragon in the world. I feel like, it's probably sort of kind of...
degrees of power, but yes.
Sort of averages out there.
But yeah, I thought that little Easter egg where Helaena kind of predicting the future, or at least foreshadowing the future, was a nice little tease.
I mean, to be honest with you, when she's on screen, I'm just like, I just kind of ignore her because she just mumbles. And it's just kind of like, whatever. But you saying that is very interesting. Did she say that this episode?
She said that in episode 6.
Okay. So do you remember what we had a brief clip with her?
Yeah,
where she had the spider.
I don't know exactly what she said in this episode off the top of my head. I'm going to be rewatching this episode with my wife here, and I'll keep an extra eye out for that as well.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting, because if they're giving little hints like episodes before through her dialogue, that'd be pretty interesting.
And so I've seen the theory that she could be a dreamer, where like she could like know things ahead of time, but we'll see. Maybe she'll have more nonsensical insights about centipedes. Maybe she'll have cool plot devices before they happen.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But anyway, so obviously there's the losing of the eye causes a big conflict, because Alicent's like, well, I want one of Rhaenyra's kids' eyes in exchange. That's fair. And I'm just sitting there like, you're crazy.
Yeah, you're insane right now.
Yeah. And everyone sees that. It was kind of a really neat confrontation, because during it, she ends up, when she doesn't get what she wants, and King Viserys is just like, we're done with this. We have to stop this infighting, all this. And she just goes and she takes his Valyrian steel like dagger and goes for Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra, catches it, and she ends up cutting her. But Rhaenyra's just like, everyone sees you for who you really are. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really a good line, because Alicent has a very opinionated view on Rhaenyra, that she basically gets what she wants, and it's not fair. It's kind of how I view how Alicent looks at things. She's just like, it's not fair that she's getting everything she wants type deal, and she gets away with all this stuff, and she's like petulant little child. And Rhaenyra views her as a snake in the grass, which
she is.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the two sides and I'm like, who do I feel strongly about? I don't really care about Alicent. Yeah. Because her entire position was built off of her father kind of getting her to worm her way into the king's good graces and getting married. And that her kids were never destined to rule, but she's trying to make it so it happens. And she's just viewing all these little things that happen as slights against her. And I don't think that if she had caused all these issues, if she had tried to really push Rhaenyra away instead of like, embracing her and trying to keep her as a friend and stuff, overlooking the fact that she lied to her about having sex with Cole, I mean, I feel like they would have ended up okay. I don't think Rhaenyra would have gone after her kids.
I don't either.
But you have Otto and all these other people who are trying to spin this into something because they don't want a woman ruler.
And what's bad about this is now, if Rhaenyra does become queen, she might go after her kids, because she's psycho and going after hers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
She would have to. There's no way now. Like, as much as King Viserys is like, we're done with this infighting. Like, no. It's just begun. It's to a point now where it has to. And you have some really interesting dynamics now, because, as I said, Alicent is shown everyone that she's crazy and she's willing to kill people. And so the remaining strong there. Laris is very much, she's embraced him now. She's like, yeah, you know what? I don't need you to go and silence or take one of her kids' eyes or kill her kids. But, it's good to have an ally like you. And I'm surprised she didn't have him go for one of their eyes. I still think she's a little in shock at what she did.
Me too. She's realizing just how far she's willing to go.
Yeah. And I think, too, that right now she's not willing to go that far yet, but she's going to.
Yeah, totally agree on that. And I think one other big thing to mention here, just with Alicent and everything, is just what does this actually mean for Rhaenyra now that, like, these cards are out in the open? There's clearly this big hostility between the two. What does this mean for Rhaenyra as far as her position at court? What does this mean for Rhaenyra as far as her father and his failing health? Like, if the king were to die, would she even know if she wasn't at court? Like, would something happen before Alicent just goes plop and puts her own kid up there?
That's going to be interesting, because that's a good question. I don't know,
because it just really reminds me of like that Game of Thrones moment where Eddard Stark walks in with his piece of paper saying, I'm going to be the interim ruler. And Cersei's like, let me see that. Oh, it's signed by the king who's dead? Rip. We're not doing that. We're doing my thing.
And he's just like, what?
Yeah.
And she's just like, no.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's either way, I think we're going to end up with some pretty big conflict here. And I'm excited. I think Well, obviously, I do believe King Viserys is going to be done next episode. I don't think he'll make it into the next season, especially since we're getting another time jump.
See, I feel like Viserys will die end of next episode.
Yeah.
And then
really kick off season 2, yeah.
Yeah, really kick off season 2. And I think we're going to see some chaos happen in the season finale that will like set us up for lots of conflict in season 2. But before we get into any of that stuff, there's one more piece of important information to discuss in this episode, and that is what happens with Rhaenyra after she sets Laenor free. She marries Daemon.
Yeah. Seemed like a pretty quick turnaround.
Oh, yeah.
And
yes.
I think that was honestly the best move for her because,
Definitely.
one, you just bring in 2 dragons into your fold, at least, and with the possibility of a third if you can find a dragon that needs a rider.
Yeah, and I think that just like the ceremony itself was way more interesting than any other wedding I think we've seen in Game of Thrones so far, with just like the cutting and the mixing of the blood and very like old
primal
style. Yeah, very primal.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and it was neat because we saw all their kids there just kind of watching. So they are now siblings.
Yes.
I saw a funny meme where it was like Marjorie Tyrell or the grandmother Tyrell there from the original series, and she was just like talking to the 2 Tyrell kids, and she's like, "So Daemon married Rhaenyra," and it's like, "Is he this or this?" And it's just like, "Oh, he's his uncle's niece's whatever the heck it is," like some crazy like definition of like their relationship now.
I saw that too, like the crazy incestuous weaving that it means like he's his own nephew or something like that because he's Rhaenyra's uncle, and so he's going to be the nephew of her husband, or her husband will be his nephew, but that's him. So now it's all crazy. Oh my god.
But I mean, I think like in talking through this episode, as much as I like this episode, I did not like how dark it was. We talked about that. But as much as I like this episode, and I do agree that I think it's probably my favorite of the season so far, I do feel like this is while we did have some plot continuation here in some big ways with Daemon and Rhaenyra marrying, Laenor leaving, Aemon getting a dragon, I think it did a lot more to set things up for the rest of the series.
I completely agree with you there. I cannot wait to see the new episode, and I'm
it's gonna be the longest one yet.
Yeah, it's gonna be the longest one yet, and I am there for it. I'm hoping that it's gonna be continuing the trajectory of just greatness and progressing the story into where it needs to be.
Agreed.
All right, well, I think that is all we have to say about House of the Dragon episode 7, Driftmark. So if you have any thoughts about Driftmark, go ahead and send us a message, send us a comment, and we'll see what the story brings us here, because lots of great political intrigue and familial drama and action to come still with this one. This is going to be 2 Nerds signing off. See ya.
Stay nerdy.